Okay, super. I've got 2 minutes past the hour on my laptop, so I'm going to stop sharing that holding screen and I want to welcome you. My name is Eileen Burbidge. I'm the Executive Director at Fertifa. Fertifa is London-based, but we're Europe's most comprehensive reproductive health benefits provider. By reproductive health benefits, we're talking about well-being support, navigational advice, diagnostics, and also support with financial access and the cost of reproductive health treatments. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's probably been a busy week already, even though it's only Wednesday. You're almost halfway there. And hopefully you're gearing up for World Menopause Awareness Day this coming Friday. To denote or commemorate that day, we're really, really pleased to be hosting this conversation. Got my colleague Celine on with me. I'll have her introduce herself in just a minute, but we're here to talk about how to attract and retain women in senior positions with menopause support. So with that, I'll just hand over to Celine, ask her to introduce herself, come back to me, give you a bit more information about what we're going to talk about today, maybe the flow, ask you a couple of questions, try and get a bit of engagement, but understand who's on with us today and what's going to be most useful to you. Okay, Celine?
Thank you, Eileen. Really pleased to be part of this conversation. I'm Celine Crawford. I'm the Director of People at Fertifa. I'm really passionate about building high-performing teams and inclusive workplaces, which really go hand in hand, in my opinion. I've had a personal journey with reproductive health, which is why I joined Fertifa in the first place. And I've been a Chief People Officer for the last decade, working with startups as well as larger companies. So hopefully this gives me a unique perspective for the conversation together.
It does. Thank you so much, Celine. We kind of roped Celine in. I think, as she's just talked about, being a thought leader in HR and people was really, really important, since what we're going to be talking about today has a lot to do with not just workplace support more broadly, but policies and how there are different forms of support within a workplace. I also thought, sorry if I'm going to out you, Celine, it's useful to have somebody talking about those points who's not necessarily going through the menopause, unlike myself, in case I end up interjecting with too many sort of personal anecdotes or projecting a bit more from my own experience. While I'm really happy to do that, maybe too much, and I think anecdotes can be useful, I really think between the two of us, hopefully we'll give you this balance of what people might be going through. Of course, it's different for everybody, but then from a workplace perspective, what would be most beneficial for the business, for the organization as well. So thanks so much, Celine. And like I mentioned at the top, just very briefly, Fertifa, we are London-based. We're Europe's most comprehensive reproductive health benefits provider. We mean by that the well-being support. So to have one of your employees, or what we call our patients, back and to be there as independent medical advice. We do that with a best-in-class in-house clinical team, but it doesn't just stop with the clinical advice. We also offer education and awareness. We also have policies. We're also thought leaders, we'd like to think, in this space. And so what we'll weave into a lot of today's conversation is, for example, a groundbreaking survey that we have just completed in the last week, which is the UK's largest survey on workplace menopause support. And so we'll weave in some of the findings that we've had from that, but that's an example of our thought leadership. And then we also support our patients, again, hopefully all of your employees, or soon to be your employees, with not only diagnostics and that support that I've talked about, but also the financial burden and the cost of going through any kind of reproductive health treatment, whether that's going to be funded by an organization or whether that's through a payment plan that we provide. So that is Fertifa in a nutshell. We're really, really pleased to be offering support to patients now all across the UK, Ireland, continental Europe, as well as North America, South Africa, Southeast Asia, and countries all dotted around the world. So it's a real, real pleasure to be talking about a topic that affects individuals, obviously individuals born as women at birth, when they were going through menopause or might be going through menopause, but also individuals that work with women at work. So line managers, HR managers, colleagues, and even those of us who are going to be dealing with individuals going through menopause outside of work and how that impacts workplace well-being. So with all of that as the intro and just the setup or the context framing, just to talk about what we're here to cover today, the way we're going to go through it, actually, first of all, I'll actually start with a poll while I tell you about sort of our agenda today. And I want to sort of find out, of the people that are tuning in, how many have already menopause support in place at their workplaces or at their companies, whether or not, therefore, or as a consequence, it's a priority for next year. But what we were planning to talk about, and that might change based on the results, if 100% already have menopause support in place, or 0% say it's a priority in 2025, maybe we have a different conversation. But what we were planning to talk about is first to set the baseline and to probably inform everybody with some of the same data points in terms of what the impact of menopause in the workplace is and what the commercial impacts are. Those of you who may have come across me before know that I come to this proposition, but at this topic from a real commercial point of view. I am an investor in another sort of part of my day jobs. And so I really think about the bottom line and the ROI for organizations as well as those in which I serve on their boards. And so for me, it's really important for us to really establish what the impact is. Are we just talking about it not just because we're compassionate people, but because it really does have a bearing on productivity and really over time GDP at large? So we'll talk about all of that. Then we'll probably come back, ask you a few questions in terms of how you think it might impact individuals, therefore, in workplaces. And we're going to talk about what kinds of support then can be offered. This obviously feeding into how to really support high-performing women and senior women or executive leaders within an organization. In addition to the types of support that are available, we'll be weaving in, like I said, some of the policy recommendations that we have and that Celine spent a lot of time on. We'll be continuing to feed out some of the statistics that have come out of this survey we've just completed. And then finally, we'll talk about what the benefits, return on investment, and what some of the specific financial points or considerations we can talk about at the very end. And then hopefully we still have time for Q&A. So all the while, I hope that you will continue or to tune in, but also to engage and to post any questions that you might have in the Q&A. There's also a chat function. The chat right now is only enabled for you to chat with Celine and myself. So for example, if one of us disappears, our laptop freezes, you lose the sound, let us know. But also if you're finding the topic to be, I don't know, going on and you'd rather us pivot or change tack slightly or kind of move on, feel free to let us know that too. We're really happy for any and all feedback as we go. It kind of keeps it going and it just makes it seem like it's not just Celine and I speaking to ourselves. But then we also have the Q&A open, which is anonymous, but through which we do encourage all of you to post questions, and we can therefore take them as we go, which I think will make the conversation more interesting and engaging, or we can talk about them all and cover them off if we haven't had a chance to highlight them at the very end of the session. So with all of that being said, maybe the last housekeeping point that you're probably all used to since COVID and since there have been so many webinars is this is being recorded. You've probably gotten that notification already from Zoom. The Q&A function is anonymous, so I don't think I have to caution, but just to make sure everybody knows this is being recorded. So it may potentially be viewed again in future by somebody on demand. If when asking your question, you can avoid any kind of personal identifiable details or your company name, for example, unless you really want to advertise it or you're really proud about maybe what you already do at your workplace. Just be mindful that you've got a number of attendees that'll be able to see that. We've got well over 100 participants that are on the webinar right now. And given the number of registered attendees and the ones to whom we'll be sending the links to, there might be more people who will be viewing it in future. So sorry for a bit of a ramble, but I think that gets all the sort of cursory points out of the way. We've had actually more than 80% participation on the poll, so I think I'm going to end it now. It's been open for about 4 minutes, and then I'm going to share the results. So the first question was whether or not attendees have menopause support already in place at their companies. And I'm surprised and I'm really, really impressed and pleased and proud of then everybody who's on this call. I don't know what you think, Celine, if this is what you were expecting, but we're seeing 63% of you said, yes, there is some menopause support already in place at your workplace, whereas more than thirds, so almost 40% are saying no. And then actually, even with such high numbers, so 63% saying there's already some form of menopause support in place, and therefore 29% are saying there's already, I guess, sufficient support in place for next year. There's still actually almost half of you, so 46% are saying it's a priority to put in place for 2025 or maybe to enhance what you've already got. What do you think, Celine? Was any of this surprising to you, or is there anything you wanted to say?
I think it's great that we have so many people who at least have some level of support. I'd be really interested to, hear from people in the chat if they feel comfortable, or as we're going in the conversation, what levels of support they have. And for people who don't have support, what are they considering, for 2025? So I think it'll be really engaging conversations because we do have different types of attendees today.
It's a great point. Thank you. So yeah, if you want to share with Celine and myself what you've already got in place, we're very happy to weave that into our conversation or to let people know, for example, so-and-so has just mentioned to us that what they've got in place is maybe something we're going to be talking about, but slightly different, a variation, an improvement maybe from what they first introduced. Anything, please feel free to keep us posted. So I will stop sharing the poll results. We'll go then right into the first topic that I mentioned. And by the way, thanks for the questions and the comments that are already coming in. I do see those. If you see my eyes sort of flitting around the screen, I'm keeping an eye on those. Great questions already, and I will weave them into our conversation. So keep them coming, please. But let's get started on talking about how menopause does impact individuals in the workplace, or what the impact of the workplace, not just individuals. That's what I'm trying to sort of, get across. We know actually from the survey that we've completed, and I'm going to actually keep you in suspense a little bit longer before sharing some slides from that. But we do know from even other surveys, and I'm sure many of you, especially those of you who already have some form of support in place, that from various studies, including, for example, the NHS Confederation, who just came out with a report the week before last, and their report said they thought 80,000 women are not in work in the UK at the moment because of perimenopause or menopausal symptoms. We'd known that previously widespread research showed that 42% of women experiencing perimenopausal or menopausal symptoms were thinking about dropping out of work altogether. Just starting from those two data points, I hope that we can all appreciate the impact then on candidly UK GDP. So with women making 51% of the population, 47% of the working population, and actually menopausal women being the fastest growing demographic in the workplace. So I'll repeat that because I know some people will think, oh, wait, millennials are the biggest demographic. And that is true. But the fastest growing demographic right now in the UK is of menopausal or perimenopausal women. So if you consider how many that is, and that there are, by NHS counts, 13 million women in the UK going through menopause today, when you think that 42% will consider dropping out of work altogether, let alone leaving a job or changing companies, that is potentially catastrophic to UK GDP. And I think, Celine, I'll turn over to you because clearly I'm not even taking into account the contributions these individuals are probably making at their workplaces, their seniority levels, what types of roles they have, and the like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to sound alarmist, but it's quite tragic, right? It's quite tragic that, women get to this phase in life where they have the expertise, they have the skills, they worked so hard, to get over all the barriers, stepping into leadership roles, and then because of menopause, should or might be considering ending their careers. And menopause is such a natural phase of life that we are all going to go through. So it's way beyond a personal or a medical issue. It really is a professional one, in my opinion. And workplaces have a responsibility, if they want to, one, attract and retain the best talent, but two, create supportive environment, to start putting in place better support, better frameworks, better conversations around menopause.
Well, thank you for that. And I think I might stick with you because as an HR professional and as an HR leader, for certain sizes of organizations based on turnover or headcount or the sector, if they're regulated, for example, there are requirements to do gender pay gap reporting. There are requirements for pension gap reporting, sorry. And so given those, we might look at starting to measure those points in isolation. But clearly, if you've got women then dropping out, you've got women that are potentially thinking of leaving work or even changing companies, that'll obviously skew these statistics or these objective statistics that we even have to just report from a reporting standpoint, let alone, again, the conversations, the contributions, and the progress and development at work that we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that since COVID, I think research was done from the Equality Trust. I think it's now 325 years to redress the gender pay gap. So obviously, these are really big numbers. And if we can do a little part to help the current generation, but also future generation, to have better support in place so that these women find the support that they need, because I think what we need to say is that people experience menopause in a different way. It's not a one size fits all approach, and we really need to be mindful of the flexibility that we offer in the workplaces. What might work for you might not work for me, or what might work for myself today might not work for me in 6 months time. So it's about keeping those conversations open and educating ourselves, our managers, our leaders, to be able to find what works for our organization.
No, indeed. And I think while we're wanting to remind people of those points, the other point I'd like to mention is a lot of times organizations start with just measuring sort of internally what's impacting them. So something like absenteeism and sick days. We have, and again, I'm trying to tease this all out. Hopefully the marketing team is pleased with that. We won't share the stats yet, but we've seen from other reports, and I wonder if you have anecdotal data or anything you want to highlight with respect to absenteeism, sick days, and of course, then if there's a stigma against reporting the real reason maybe somebody's taking time off or they're being impacted, how that can play into everything that we're talking about as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think obviously a lot of women feel that they cannot take time off, or they take time off, but they report it in a different way. And I think it's important to normalize conversations. And as you said, our survey will give us a bit more data around absenteeism. I also think it's equally concerning to discuss presenteeism. And I know maybe that's obviously the opposite. But what I'm trying to say is, women who force themselves to physically be at work, but then because of the symptoms are too unwell to perform, at the level that they wish, I think that's equally concerning.
Did I say I would try not to share too many personal anecdotes, but that one hit really close to home. So
Too
no.
tempting.
Thanks, Celine. Yeah, so hopefully, and by the way, I think I'll sort of acknowledge some of the questions that have come in. The first point was, and again, forgive me if I'm talking too fast, do feel free to use the chat to tell me if I need to slow down. But in terms of what's come in, somebody was asking whether or not, because I alluded to the fact that this session is being recorded, and if everyone would receive a copy of the recording. Appreciate you asking. Yes, we will send a copy of the recording to everybody who's registered, so that includes all of you who have attended as well. For those of you who didn't want a recording, sorry, just send it to trash, but I appreciate the person who asked for the recording. A related question was all of these stats that are rolling off my tongue. And again, we do talk about this a lot, of course, with our patients, with our workplace clients, and internally within the organization. So they are top of mind for us. You will be able to recapture all of these stats then if you watch it back. If you have any questions or you wanted sources or any further information, please feel free to get in touch with us and we can provide that as extra as well. Finally, another question that came in, and I think it's a great question because I was actually alluding to women, assigned at birth, the gender assigned at birth, and the question came in about how I think it would be referred to as andropause in terms of testosterone deficiency for men, and whether or not there's been research on that was the question. There has been some research. I would say it's very, very light. It's not nearly to the extent of menopause research, and we all know that there hasn't been enough research on menopause. So I would say it's early days with testosterone deficiency. I would say that while I'm not a clinician or medical professional, we know from Gideon Lieberman, our medical director, and a lot of the education and the teachings that we have within Fertifa, that even though many men will suffer from testosterone deficiency and see a decline in testosterone naturally as they age, the reason it's not quite at the same degree of menopause, or why it's maybe not talked about in such severe terms, is because the drop off, the decline is not at the same level of what women experience with their decline in estrogen and progesterone. So it's not quite the same, but there is, of course, medically established a natural decline in testosterone levels as men age. We won't be covering that as much or at all, I don't think, unless more people ask questions. Happy to talk about it to the extent that Celine and I are aware. But what we are hoping to cover most of today, again, sort of commemorating what's coming up on Friday in terms of menopause awareness, will be the impact on women and when they go through perimenopause and menopausal symptoms. So thank you for those questions. I think since I've kind of drawn my attention over there, I'll also point to some of I can't read them all, and I love it because we're capturing this. This is all incredibly useful for us. And it's also just helpful for us then to share with everybody else who's on the webinar. People have been sharing the degree to which they already have support in place, which is hugely gratifying to see. There are people who are coming in and saying that they don't offer anything today. So for you, we're really, really pleased, or those of you who are really pleased that you're tuning in, and we hope that the session will give you the basis, the rationale, the justification, and the business case for getting some in place at your company, and also some ideas of where to start if cost or budget is a concern, and where you can progress to. But we're hearing some people have menopause cafes, they call them, so monthly basis, where it sounds like they're physical, in person, where employees can drop in and attend, hosted by their people director, which means that's a leader within the organization, which we think, and I think we'll touch on later as well, sends terrific signal and obviously shows the genuine support. Others also have monthly forums, one-to-one drop-in sessions. They also give reasonable adjustments, for example. Others are talking about the fact that they offer managers and also enterprise physicians information so that they can chart to measure whether or not they see any change in performance, and inviting them to then bring up the conversation. So that kind of alludes to creating this safe space, or at least a space in which this conversation can be normalized. We have some who are just starting their policies and their policy writing. You have come to the right place. We will send you a pointer to our template menopause policy towards the end of this session. So thank you. Got steering committees, general awareness, some with very specific topics, keynote speakers, people coming in. We're hearing about well-being champions that also cover menopause, even podcasts. Some are using their existing healthcare providers, it looks like, that are offering enhanced menopause support. And I think that's covered sort of the scope or the gamut. We've also got somebody who's really offered even more statistics. So coming back to the testosterone deficiency, and thank you for chipping that's in, so I'm happy to share it or amplify it. They're citing research which shows about 17% of men in their 50s, and somewhere about 20% of men in their 60s, so slight increase from 17% to 20% between 50s and 60s, suffer from testosterone deficiency. And actually, while 6% of women are treated for menopause, only 1% of men are treated. I appreciate that proportionally that doesn't seem quite right, and there's a lot of work to do. I would say if we're looking at up to 20% of men suffering from testosterone deficiency, but you're looking at 100% of women who will have a precipitous decline in estrogen progesterone levels, there probably is a reason for that relative disproportion at the moment. But I completely agree with this person's last comment, which we need to get rid of both, taboos around both, and or stigma, or the fact that there's not enough information around both. So thank you everybody for chipping in and for offering your data points, what you've got within your organizations, and whether or not there's anything else that you want to hear or talk about. So with that said, I do think, because we've covered some of our stats, some of our anecdotes, some of what other people have shared as well, and talked about how there is categorically an impact on the workplace because of menopause, I'll actually just open up another poll as I'm going to start to share some of the information about what we found out in our survey, which I should say is actually the largest UK survey on workplace menopause support. And therefore, we're really pleased with having received as many responses as we got. Hopefully, as we go and over time, we'll get more and more responses, and the data will become even more and more sort of enriched. But I'm going to bring this up now. I'll hopefully share my screen. And I'm flipping between, obviously, between Zoom, PDFs, and PowerPoint. So just bear with me real quick. And also take the chance, this was my sort of flashy way of trying to distract you, to answer the poll data at the same time. So sharing this screen, going to a PDF, we'll make it full screen. Celine will tell me if that is visible or not in the full screen mode, please.
Looks good.
Yeah, should I make it full screen though? Is that better?
Yeah, go for full screen. Yes, perfect.
Okay, super, thank you. So while we're bringing that up, I can go to this very first question. Well, maybe I shouldn't, actually. Maybe marketing would tell me off for that, Celine. I don't know, because I'm wanting more people to still reply to the poll. I'm doing it again. Okay. I'll hide that. I'll still keep hiding that. But let's see when we get more responses. We've got a number of you, more than half of them already responded, but would love for other people to chip in with their guesses in terms of what percentage of people that we surveyed said they wouldn't feel comfortable talking to the HR or line manager about menopause. And I think this is really, really apropos given the responses you all gave into the very first poll, because so many of you already have menopause support in place, which is brilliant. I think, what we'll be able to talk about is how many people are accessing that, how many people know about that, how many people are still maybe not super comfortable doing that, even when there's support in place. And then the second question is, what percentage of respondents actually said they're looking for a new job right now that would include menopause support? So curious to know what people think, especially when this is such a well-informed audience and group of attendees that we've had. So we've got more than 3/4 of responses in already, or people participating. I know it's almost 1:30 here in the UK, so people can be excused for having grabbed a sandwich or lunch and maybe are just watching as opposed to wanting to participate in the survey. So we'll just wait a couple more seconds, or maybe until we get to about 2.5 minutes or 3 minutes before I end this poll. Yeah, I've shown you already the sneak peek a couple times, but then I'll go into the slides that we have as well. While we're waiting and giving people more time to answer the poll, I love a comment that's just come in, whether or not it's too idealistic to suggest awareness at high school or in secondary school. I would say no. Celine's probably nodding and smiling because she knows I will not shut up about how I think so many topics that we don't talk about relating to women, gender disparity, inequality. I get asked about business, diversity, inclusion. All of these things, I think, start when men and women, boys and girls, are really young.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was actually telling Celine just this morning how I'm trying to
What
normalize
is
it in my own house. I
Yeah.
have 4 boys, 2 girls. They range in ages from 9 to 18. And when I'm not feeling comfortable, it's kind of, I'm used to sort of getting on with it, trying not to moan and not making a big deal and not wanting to sort of frighten off, I guess, my girls about what they might experience later. And then I sort of said to myself, no, I need to normalize it. It's okay for both the boys and the girls to hear, listen, I'm not feeling myself, or there's something, I'm going to change, I don't know, whether or not I'm going with them to school or not because of how I'm feeling, and it relates to the menopause, and it's okay. But just to talk about it, because we know too many women are saying now they didn't hear about this. Too many men as well in the workplace didn't realize that this was a topic because they didn't hear about it from their moms, from their family members. And sorry, Celine, what were you going to say?
I was going to say the exact same thing, that we were both discussing this because we have daughters, but also sons, and that it's important not only in the workplace, but before then, to normalize these conversations, in an age-appropriate way, of course, but to make sure that it's not kind of a big surprise of an unknown or a taboo, but it's, slowly talked about, and people are comfortable, having, discussions around it, no matter how old they are. So I absolutely love this comment that was put in the chat, and I 100% support that.
Yeah, thank you very much. So again, keep your comments coming, please. They're really, really helpful to us. So I'm going to end this poll now because it has been open for more than 4.5 minutes. We did get almost 80% participation, so I think that's a pretty good summary of things. Let me share the results. So what percentage of respondents said they wouldn't feel comfortable talking to HR or their line manager about menopause? And you all guessed maybe 23%. So maybe 1 in 4 wouldn't feel comfortable. What were the options now that I'm looking at it? One was because we gave these as the options. Wow,
Yes.
we gave very specific numbers.
Yeah, we give the
Okay,
numbers.
sorry.
The left-hand
Okay.
side of the numbers, yeah.
Right. So you could guess 20-ish%, 40-ish%, or 60-ish%. Well, okay, fair play. Thank you. But so, okay, then I'm reading this better. Sorry. Thanks, Celine. So more than half, or almost half, 45% of you guessed that more than half of the survey respondents would not feel comfortable. So that is actually, I think, really great mindfulness and awareness that even when we put policies in place, even when we're proud, and we should be proud of the fact that there is support in place, we still assume that more than half of people in a workplace, so 61%, I guess more so than we thought, 40-ish or 20%, wouldn't feel comfortable talking about it, tells us that we probably need other forms of support as well. And then what percentage of respondents said they're currently looking for a new job? And I do like that, more than half picked the highest percentage, which was 13%. Wonder what would have happened. And so I'm giving away the answer, but that is the right answer. And I wonder if one of the choices should have been higher than the third, to see if everyone just went for the highest choice. Do you know what I mean? But thank you all for putting in your responses for that. See if you think is as interesting as we did now, given the slides that I'm going to go to. And here I can finally do this without going oops and going back. So this was what our survey responses yielded in terms of first of all, how menopause symptoms are affecting people at work. And again, we kind of covered this off in the first part of the conversation, but you're seeing that it runs the gamut. And again, look at the numbers and the percentages in terms of, first of all, the orange one is time off work. And I think this is interesting, and we'll talk about this again later as well, right, Celine? Whether or not people will ascribe or admit or report the fact that they're taking time off because of menopause symptoms. But if you look at then the dark purple, we're talking about the sort of impact in terms of on the work with respect to confidence, bringing their best selves to work, making contributions, and potentially carrying themselves. And it's like you said, Celine, presenteeism,
Yeah.
just sort of, turning up and being there at work. Even so, with respect to cognitive function, concentration, focus, almost 40% were saying that this is impacting them. And obviously then the kind of big kicker, if you look in the lower right-hand corner of that stat, with 13% saying that they were looking for a new job that might include menopause support. If you perpetuate that or you project that against then the 13 million women today in the UK that are going through perimenopause or menopause, that suggests that up to or more than 1 million women right now are looking for new jobs. Is there anything else you wanted to add? I'm sorry I'm hogging the mic so much, Celine, before I go to the next one.
No, I think, it's pretty clear that, we know that it has a really difficult impact on women. Hopefully, what we can talk about today together is, how do we reduce this stigma so that people feel comfortable taking the time off if they're unwell, saying that they're sick, and taking the time to kind of recuperate to come back to work in a positive way. And how can we create safe spaces to discuss this so that people don't feel they will be discriminated against? So this is their anticipation that if they share that they have menopause, that they will have negative repercussions either on their careers or how they're perceived, basically.
Yeah, that's really well said. Thank you. So then the next slide, this was one of the poll questions, obviously. Have you ever seriously considered leaving the job? And I already gave that kicker on the last slide, which was that 13% are thinking about they're looking for a new job now. Even so, more than 10% said that they'd already left their jobs or taken a significant change in their responsibilities. This is one that actually really speaks to me because it has definitely occurred to me lots of times over the last couple of years, as in like, do I really want to, do I have the energy? Do I have the wherewithal to keep going at this level? And then, of course, almost a third of people without access said that they've left or are considering leaving the job. So that's a third of people who don't have any kind of support in their workplace, thinking about their leaving. Even people with or without, so even the larger superset of people, which is that 13%, said they're looking for a new job now, and they're probably looking for either any kind of menopause support in the workplace or enhanced support in the workplace. So those were those 2 points as well. Anything you wanted to add to this, Celine?
I think it's pretty simple that workplace policies can change this narrative, hopefully, and that there are very basic, simple things that workplaces can do to make sure that this doesn't happen or that people don't get to the point where they're leaving their job, right? Because there's like a whole amount of time usually before someone decides to leave their job and before they actually leave their job. And so there's a great opportunity to have some positive changes. And it's often more simpler than people think. I think we've had some really great examples in the chat of people having a variety of things that they're implementing. As their workforces are changing, these things might change as well. We always talk about policies being kind of living and breathing documents, changing with the times, changing with the workforce. And so it's really important to talk about this and make sure we can help each other, right? Because we're always learning.
No, absolutely. And I realized while you were talking and we're talking about this more generally, but also as I was about to go on to the next slide, I should have said, so I'm really sorry. So I'm really proud of this survey. And I mentioned that we just closed it. I think it was last week or the beginning of last week or the end of the week before. It is the largest ever survey in the UK on menopause workplace support. I should have said, though, that this is coming out. We're publishing it tomorrow. So you're getting a sneak peek, and you will all get a recording of this, so you'll be able to see this. We will also probably follow up and happily send you a copy of the report when we're publishing it tomorrow. We're going live with it tomorrow morning, but great if you were not to maybe post publicly about it until tomorrow, if that's all right, because like I said, we're offering all of you an exclusive sneak peek to these specific data points. But with that said, then I'll go on to the next one, which was that very first question, which was whether or not individuals and respondees felt comfortable talking about menopause with either their manager or HR, so one or the other, and more than 6 in 10. So 61% say they did not. This applies to those who had menopause support in place or don't from their workplace, which is obviously slightly worrying for those that do, because it means we need to really work on, again, how to destigmatize and how to normalize the conversation at work so that women feel like there are no negative repercussions to them for discussing the fact that they're going through what every single woman is going to go through. And actually all we need to talk about is the varying degrees to which the symptoms have presented themselves and might be affecting somebody from day to day. So don't know if there was anything else you wanted to mention on this slide, Celine.
Well, I think it's a really telling statistic. So 61% of women, we always talk about the trifecta between the HR person, the manager, and the individual themselves. And so what we're seeing here is that more than half of people aren't comfortable to, actually reveal that they're going through the menopause for fear of, being discriminated. So there's definitely a lot of work to do. But what we always say, I think, Eileen, is, and we've heard from people in the chat saying that they have a workplace champion, for example, they have a cafe. It could just be a colleague that's a good friend. I think as long as we encourage people to find that person to speak to, we can start helping people normalize the conversations, and with the hope of seeing that statistic come down, either by educating managers better, opening the conversations better. I know that you do that very well, Eileen, for example, even in our work, and making sure that people feel comfortable listening, also asking questions, because a lot of the times people worry that they're going to say something wrong, and so they stay silent. And so normalizing that we might not get it right, we need to get it wrong to get it right, but it's okay, let's all ask these questions and get the conversation going.
Yeah, and I think that's why earlier when somebody mentioned, what they've got in their workplace and it's led by, I think they mentioned their HR director, and I alluded to the fact that, if leaders, it doesn't mean that the leader has to be going through it, but if leaders sort of have these cues where they're comfortable mentioning certain words, talking about certain topics, there's not a nervous giggle, there's not a strange roll of the eyes, do you know what I mean? They normalize the conversation at their level, typically then people who are observing that, teams, individuals, team leads, but even colleagues, they'll see that and they'll say, there is nothing wrong with mentioning, a situation that every single woman's going to go through. We talk about people who come back, from ski holidays or family holidays and have broken their wrist, pulled their Achilles, injured their IT band with a fun run over the weekend, whatever it is. We talk about health all the time, actually. And there should be no reason why we don't talk about reproductive health when every single one of us has reproductive organs and when everybody's going to go through menopause if they're a female. So it helps when leaders do try and help normalize the conversation a lot.
Yeah. And I really love something that somebody just wrote in the chat, because I actually had it in capital letters in my notes. And it's about talking about the people who are going through menopause, but also talking for the people who are supporting people who are going through menopause. And I think that's such a key point as well, because it's not just the people who are going through menopause, but how do we help other people who are there for those people, or help them understand, educate them, and again, just, remove the stigma. So thank you for putting that in. I think it should be actually in every policy.
Yeah, I do agree. And somebody else has mentioned something I think that is really, really relevant, because I've talked about leaders just now. I've talked about who can help normalize the conversation, the cues. And somebody's helpfully pointing out that when we talk about companies of all sizes, we have fewer female leaders at those businesses or at the tops of those businesses than we do have male leaders. Obviously, an irrefutable fact. And so the question I think they posed, or the sort of quandary they've established, or the reality of the situation is, how do you get male leaders to also normalize it, but even be aware of it? And I think I tried to touch on it earlier when I suggested that we know, too many men aren't aware of this because they didn't hear about it through their families, through their own mothers, or through the women in their lives and their families. We talk about, for example, at Fertifa, when we're working with our prospective clients or our clients, that menopause workplace support and educational support is relevant to the entire workforce, not just the women. So I know, and I wrestle with, even our sales team when we're talking about pricing it for an organization, for example. To me, it doesn't matter what the demographic makeup of the company is and how many women might be taking up the menopause support. Our support is available for line managers, for HR professionals, for team leads, and for executives who might be men as well. It's so important for team leaders who are wanting to get the best out of their teams and to help motivate them and to help be a good leader, for them to be aware of and to understand menopause, its impact on the workplace, and how to support their colleagues and their teams. And so really, all of what we do in terms of Fertifa, with our education, with our support, with the ability of our clinical team to chat with people and to be there for people, that's not just for the women going through it, it's also for men in their lives, but also in the workplace as well. It's really, really important. But you're absolutely right. Of course, I'm not trying to trivialize this individual's point, which is we have more male leaders than we do have women. But I'm hoping that some of the work that we do and other organizations as well is trying to inform and educate men just as much as it is for the women, if not even more so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really important, and I think what the question is also asking in a way is, how do you get the buy-in from these men who are running the businesses to give one, the time of day, to the resources or the budget, or even the flexibility in the policy that you want to share with your wider workforce. And, there's different approaches. When we work with companies, obviously we want to give data-driven arguments. So, get the data in front of people who are making these decisions, whether you're doing it through your own employee survey, whether you have kind of a workplace champion or a workplace group that puts together an initiative, whether you bring someone in to, discuss with the wider group. And as Eileen said, these men have sisters, daughters, mothers, they will empathize. I think sometimes people react in different ways in terms of the impact and the decision making, and it's a bit of a trial and error sometimes, which is not ideal, but we like to use data to support this as one way to do that.
Absolutely right. And to that point about data, somebody's asked a really good question, which I'm happy to answer here. They've asked about sort of the methodology of the survey that I've talked about when I said it is the largest in the UK to date for workplace menopause support. So the question was about the demographic, and I'm happy to say, so they asked if it was UK, just UK or globally or European. It was UK only. They're also asking about the age group, and the survey was targeted at women, UK only, ages from 30 to 70, so 30 to 70. It was collected between the 2nd and the 27th of September. So it is very, very fresh, very, very recent, and hopefully very relevant to this conversation. And no, you didn't miss me saying it. So thank you for asking in the Q&A. I appreciate that. With that, I think I'm going to stop sharing those slides. I'm also conscious of the time now, which I hadn't been paying attention to. Sorry, Celine, I'm clearly rambling too much. But we've covered, of course, what the impacts of menopause are on the workplace, both for individuals a bit and also now leaders and other people as well. We've talked about why it's important, how it's impacting those individuals. Let's talk about, and I thought this was going to be the bulk of the conversation, so I am sorry that we didn't leave more time for this, and that means I'm going to speak even faster now. But how then to implement support, the different types of support. We've covered, of course, what some people attending the webinar have already told us they do, but I'd love to turn this over to you, Celine, to talk about, again, or recap all the different types of support, because we're not just, of course, talking about tick box exercises, knowing now how many people are still uncomfortable seeking it out.
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say first, and I'll do that now before I forget, I am sharing in the chat a link to our own template. So if you responded that you didn't have anything in place and you don't know where to start, I think it's a good place to get inspired, look at the template, and, create something that's right for you. But as you say, so the first important thing, let's say if you start with the policy, is having clarity in the policy so that people understand what time they can take off, if they can, is it paid or unpaid? If you're a partner, do you get time off? Can you get time off for appointments? I think this was very prevalent in our survey around the time off for appointments, or sometimes people just need flexible working, or, it depends. Having the open conversation to create a personal plan beyond the tick box exercises. If you've gone and have a policy, you may have the best policy in place, but if people don't know where to find it, then you might as well not have one as well. So the second important thing is helping companies signpost it in the right way, depending on the type of workforce that they have, depending on the demographic, depending on the type of worker that they have. So that's very, very important. And then, like us at Fertifa, we have educational awareness webinars like this one, for example. We work with our clients to help educate managers as well as their general employees around menopause, and also our clinicians. Do you want to say a little bit around the support that we offer from our clinical team, Eileen?
Yeah, of course. Although it's going to mean we're definitely going to be out of time because I could talk about them all day. But I've already mentioned our medical director, Gideon Lieberman. He's absolutely brilliant. He was and still is, but he was forefront in terms of fertility and with hormonal medicine relating to fertility and challenges relating to fertility. That means he was a natural proponent also for menopause because he understands what the impacts are on fertility for estrogen, progesterone levels, and other hormones. And he is, I have to admit, I was always wondering, how can a man be so understanding about menopause? It really did befuddle me at first, but actually talking to Gideon has been really, really impactful for me, just individually with my own symptoms. And just hearing him talk to other people, he gives webinars on the topics. He's obviously one of our clinical team members that will do one of our, monthly webinars from time to time on clinical topics. And I know I'm straying off here because I keep just going on about Gideon, but my point is, Gideon leads an entire in-house clinical team that we have. This clinical team is who is the front line to talk to our patients, which are our workplace clients, employees. They have therefore access to our clinical team from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. every UK working day for any questions at all, whether they're, am I too young to be experiencing perimenopausal symptoms? Am I too old to maybe accidentally fall pregnant? To, should I consider HRT? To, I've been on HRT, but I'm thinking about the patch. High level, low level, potentially if they're less than 45 years old, to maybe get a menopause test, which we can support them through and look at those results and understand. And also, of course, for any follow-up. But we do that support for all of our pathways. And of course, I'm emphasizing menopause today. It also means we've got those diagnostics that I mentioned, which are the testing, potentially prescriptions if helpful. And then finally, we can still, like I said, offer that financial support as well. So if a company wants to reimburse somebody for the costs of the HRT or for their testing kits, or potentially for some other type of reproductive health treatment, we will support that. Or we can offer a payment plan from Fertifa as well. So in terms of the support, and thanks again for doing that sort of run through of all the different things, I do think the most interesting thing, because it keeps coming up now in the chat, is this awareness. Somebody has brought up about drop-in sessions and whether or not, it makes sense to encourage men to attend those as well. I 100% agree with that, or would support that. So whether you're calling them drop-in sessions, cafes, lunch and learns, I think this point is that while we're talking about creating a safe space for women to talk about their menopausal symptoms, or maybe just even ask about menopause support, there also needs to be that safe space. And it's the same space, I would argue, for men to be involved in the conversation without causing offense, without making generalizations, to try and recognize that menopause will affect everybody differently. It's not the same. Just like everybody has a different experience, with their menstrual cycle, every single person will have a different experience with menopause as well. But men, it is, I can imagine it's challenging for men to try and find out, even if they had heard about it from a family member, from their spouse or from their partner or from the mom, they might not necessarily feel equipped to understand what somebody else might be going through. And so, yes, I would agree that promoting, a safe space for those conversations to happen would benefit all individuals in the workplace, women and men, which is why, like I said, I push when we talk to prospects about how menopause support is not just for the women in an organization, it's for the whole organization at large.
I just wanted to add here that it's also important to consider, individuals, right? We all have different personalities. So, a woman going through menopause might react completely differently to another woman. And I don't mean physiologically, I mean in how she wants to absorb her information. She might want to actually not speak to anyone about it. But for example, if you look at our template, there's loads of resources that we've added. She wants to do research. She wants to look at resources. Somebody else would rather go to a cafe and talk live to someone who's gone through it. And so I think over communicating is in different methods will be the best way to reach as many people as possible, who will then select their preferred way of interacting, I guess, with this information and educating themselves. So I think I just wanted to point out that it's good to have cafes as well as one-on-one sessions. Maybe, people want to be anonymous, maybe they want to be spokespeople. Create the space for people to show up in how it works best for them.
Thank you for that. I'm going to start covering some more questions, but given the time, I also want to do just one last poll. Sorry, bear with me, but I've actually been enjoying these. So I wanted to know, just because I know it's 9 minutes to the hour, we might start losing people if they have to get ready for their other calls. I can't thank you all enough for joining again, by the way. I've been really, really overwhelmed and touched by how many registered and how many actually attended. We know it's a busy week. We know you're busy anyway in any given week, but there's so many events happening with respect to menopause awareness. We're really pleased to be able to be a thought leader in the space, to have finished the largest, survey in the UK, for example, to support so many clients and patients already today with menopause support. And so to be that type of resource that you turn to, we don't take your time lightly. But before people start going away, and we're still here to answer more questions, and there is still more I want to talk about, but we wanted to find out whether or not the webinar has actually affected anybody's sort of, I don't know, interest, inclination, or even what they feel their probability of success might be if they've always been an advocate, but it's been maybe difficult within their organization for implementing more menopause support, and whether they're looking for any provider, for example, or other resources that we can help with. Having said that, I did just want to also cover other things that are in the chat. Celine did post that link for downloading the policy. And I've reposted it as well, so that hopefully everyone can see that now. If you cannot see it, please let us know. And I should have mentioned before I stopped sharing the slides, because there was a beautiful graphic that supported it too. I've tried to replicate it with emojis. Doesn't do it justice. But the entire report will be available on our website from tomorrow. So while people are responding to this last poll, I think what I wanted to close on, and again, I'm keeping an eye on more questions and comments that'll come in. So thank you again for letting us know what your organizations do. I think we should close on basically what I alluded to, and I promise, sort of the ROI, the impact, and the longer term benefits that organizations are going to see from investing in menopause support, which should feed back to the title of this webinar, which was how to attract and retain women in senior positions. And I guess the TLDR, I would say, that we're coming up with, or the sort of bottom line is, we're suggesting that if the workplace is a safe space for conversations for women to feel like they're not going to be stigmatized for going through menopause or perimenopause, or for experiencing those symptoms, or for requesting reasonable adjustments, or for potentially having issues with presenteeism, for example, that if they feel like they can still bring their best selves to work, as and how that might fluctuate based on what they might be going through, they would then feel more supported in the workplace and probably not be one of these 13% of women that are now looking for a new job. But I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say, Celine, about the longer term benefits with respect to some of the other things we talked about, or to sort of bring them back again.
Well, I think it's important to think, I always think, for example, around, ageism and, inclusivity and diversity. We want diversity of thought in the workplace. So, we want to retain people who have been with us for a long time, who know the history of a business, who have upskilled themselves, who've worked for many, many years. And it's just a shame to just lose them at that point of their career because we haven't really thought of the type of support that's been added. It's a shame to lose them to another company, but it's even more a shame to lose them completely. So, knowing there's a few simple things that we can do to try and retain people, I would really, encourage and hope that people start by doing that tomorrow, because it actually doesn't cost anything to put a policy in place.
No, that's a great point. So in talking about ROI, or return on investment, you're absolutely right. And that's why we've shared the resource that we've provided in terms of support in developing a policy. You're right. It takes somebody time to do the research and to see whether or not they can get it posted on in their organization, on the intranet, and get the executive support, of course, and the buy-in. But there's no cost, there's no hit to the P&L. You don't have to take anything from the balance sheet. You don't have to spend any hard cash or any money in order to just have a policy in place. And the policy recognizes menopause is a thing. It is something that every woman's going to go through in that workplace, that hopefully the organization is trying to destigmatize it and suggesting that it's safe to talk about it, understanding that people still find it difficult to do that, because that was 61%, wasn't it, from our survey, that then that's how you start, right? And that is free. And the benefits that you'll get from even doing that is that people will start to think, maybe, even if it was a no before, and they'll have that conversation, they'll start having that conversation. And from there, yes, of course, there's more that can be done in terms of actually spending money or investing from a benefits budget, for example, in order to provide the well-being support. Like, we can provide educational awareness materials, having a webinar series, for example. Other people, like they've talked about, drop-in sessions, lunch and learns, cafes, or even to ask for menopause champions within the organization in the workplace that'll start the conversations. Again, hopefully supplementing what leaders are already saying in the workplace as well, or the fact that they're normalizing it too. But all of those are very, very low sort of investment, low spend. I think we kind of went in order of free to, paying some costs. And even if there is the interest to cover some of the financial burden, but not from the organization, there's providers like Fertifa that'll do a payment plan, for example. So we're happy to have those conversations, and we just want more people to be aware that these things exist.
So well said. I don't think I can add anything.
No, so true. You're exhausted from listening to me. That's what it is. But no, I appreciate that. I feel like there will be more questions and such, but I'm also, again, looking at the time. I usually like to give people quite a bit more time back before the hour. And it's really nice of people when they note that they have to drop off. I feel like that's so polite. It's as if we're having a meeting as opposed to a webinar, but it has been such a joy to interact with so many of you, having, again, you lent your time. So we hope that we've touched on at least the main points of what people wanted to get across. Hope I've answered all of the questions. Somebody else has mentioned, for example, right before we go, that, occupational health providers or OH providers are probably the first stop for many. And that's probably true. And so, yes, having those providers signpost to enriched levels of support would be great. We'd obviously be glad to be the one being signposted to. And we do work with a number of different other providers. And we signpost, of course, back and forth across the organization as well when we support our workplace clients. But thanks for all of you who have chipped in. Thank you to Celine, who's had to listen to me ramble, but then also sort of help me fill in the gaps. Appreciate everyone who's responded to all the surveys and all of the polls. We've again shared the pointer to the policy template. We've also shared that you'll be able to download the full report from our website tomorrow. We'd be grateful if you want to share any of those stats, if you want to share any of the graphics from it, if you want to help signpost or bring attention to it. As we've talked about, first step is bringing awareness to the topic to more and more people. I think somebody very, very articulately put in the chat earlier, this has just been not talked about for too long. So again, the reason for this week, this month, and on Friday being the World Menopause Awareness Day is to bring more attention to it and shine a light on it. So hopefully all of our resources will support you in being able to do that, both within your organizations as well as externally as well. So with that, thank you again, all of you, for joining. Thanks so much to Roxy, Lizzie, Amelia, and James from our marketing team, who have done so much work on this survey and pulling all of the materials together for today's session. And of course, to my co-host, Celine. Thank you.